Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about The Little Fugitive from 1953. So, The Little Fugitive is probably one of the more influential films in film history that you probably haven't heard of, as it is a primary influence on French New Wave, particularly Francois Truffaut with 400 Blows, which is a great movie, as well as a lot of the way it was shot would go on to influence Steadicam, John Cassavetes, and apparently Stanley Kubrick has seen it once or twice or something. The Little Fugitive was a landmark film because of how different it really was. And that might not be as obvious now. I still think it is a very good movie, and one you should definitely see if you never have. But basically what this film is about, it's a simple plot. Two little kids in Brooklyn in the 1950s, Joey and his older brother Lenny, and their mother needs to go take care of their grandmother who isn't feeling very well. She has to leave. She leaves the two kids in Brooklyn where they live. Over several days, Lenny has to watch his brother Joey. Lenny's maybe like 12 years old. Joey is about 7. Lenny doesn't really want to hang out with Joey. He wants to hang out with his friends, and they think Joey is really annoying. So they play a trick on Joey with ketchup and a toy gun and convince Joey that he has killed his brother. And Joey, fearing that he will be arrested, decides to do what I guess any child criminal decides to do and runs away to Coney Island. Basically, he gets on the subway, he takes some money he finds around the apartment and runs to Coney Island and just kind of plays games, follows people, collects bottles on the sand and collects money so he can ride horses at Coney Island, get water, take funny pictures, all sorts of stuff while he hangs out in Coney Island as his brother has to go try to find him before his mom gets home and figure out first off where he is, so he can get him back in time for his mom not to find out what happens when she comes home. Aside from that, nobody leaves their 12-year-old and their 7-year-old home alone anymore, really, for that significant amount of time. The reason this film, which might sound like kind of a trifle thing, was such a big deal is mainly how it was shot. This was directed by Ray Ashley, Morris Ingle, and Ruth Orkin, who also wrote the film and were actually nominated for an Oscar for Best Story. The Oscars were cooler back then, guys. Well, a little. Morris Ingle, who I think mainly gets most of the credit. I know him and his wife worked on this. His wife helped edit it. Ray Ashley also worked there and worked in Coney Island. I think the directing credit thing is a little confusing to me. I know Morris Ingle and Ruth Orkin seems to work together mostly in this and 2 other films. Regardless, Morris Ingle went to his friend Charlie Woodruff and kind of made an invention so he could have the camera strapped onto him, so like a small camera, so no one would really notice it. So when he's at Coney Island, these aren't like, other than the kids who are not really professional actors, I guess, around all of the various like crowds and everything like that, those are actually people. I don't think any of them signed a release or anything. So you get actual Coney Island in the 1950s because he's just like filming it, and because he's actually more of a photographer, it feels more like photographs at that time. It's feels like photography than cinematography in a lot of ways, which kind of gives it more of a naturalistic feeling, particularly for that time period. So a lot of it you're getting like actual people. It's almost like very kind of a documentary style because they were able to make this thing which would go on to influence what would happen with the Steadicam, which is probably why Stanley Kubrick liked it. I actually can't figure out why Stanley Kubrick liked it. Everyone says that. Everyone else has a reason except Stanley Kubrick, which maybe that's a metaphor. I don't know. The way this moves, and I love when Joey's in Coney Island, because it just feels like, what would you do as a kid if you were alone in an amusement park with money and you weren't sure what to do with yourself? And that's effectively what this film is. That's what it does. And it does it very well. I showed this film to my daughter, who's 4, and anytime we watch any movie or show or something and there's about to be a play date and the camera cuts away, she always says, "Oh man, I wanted to see the play date," because she wanted to see that. So although this film is very plotless and old and not film language wise what her understanding of what movies are, it worked very well because she enjoys those things. It sort of reminded me of what we would see in American Graffiti. It obviously, reminded me of 400 Blows. When I first saw it, I saw 400 Blows first. I think most people who've seen this film have seen 400 Blows first. You should see 400 Blows if you didn't get that, but you should also see this film. It does feel very plotless, like meandering. There's ton of drama except for Lenny. You do feel drama because you feel worried about Joey because he's in Coney Island all by himself, and you are getting this picture of 1950s New York. This would go on to influence, the way he shot this would influence John Cassavetes when he would make his New York movies. He's stated this in actual interviews, and you can get a sense of like what you think of like an underground New York movie. But what I love about this film is that all of those are like edgy and like, you know, have the Cassavetes style of acting and the, you know, the crazier cinematography and all that stuff. And that's fine. I love that. But The Little Fugitive isn't that movie. It's a sweet, nice little movie about a little kid who is just stuck on Coney Island and what he would do. And in some ways it goes a little far. Like it feels like an episode of a cartoon where you're like, wow, he's really stuck there for a little bit. Like, what is he going to do? And he's afraid of cops. But that's like the only plot line you get. Like, you're kind of like feel like you're really there in 1950s Coney Island. Like, it uses its setting. So Coney Island in itself is a great place, and maybe I like this film just because that is the place where we take my daughter and we go every summer, and it's wonderful. And I am interested in, because there's like, I think a Buster Keaton short I've reviewed before that is on Coney Island over 100 years ago now, but when I reviewed it, it was 100 years ago. And it's interesting to look at how that place has evolved because of film. That might be because of the prominence of New York and so forth, but I still think, like, just watching this little kid walk around New York, there's a certain joy to it, particularly the way it's shot. Like, there's shots under the boardwalk of two people kissing really sticks with me, but that feels more like how a photographer thinks. Like, if you look at how this whole thing is shot, like even like how he's capturing people, how he's capturing Joey walking around New York, certain shots. I don't think all of it, obviously shooting with a motion, you know, with an actual movie camera, but there's a certain feeling to it. It captures childhood in such a way that it reminded me of those meandering summer days when I was young, and you just sort of walk around your suburban town, or you walk around your town or wherever you grew up, and just kind of figure out stuff to do and get caught into this and that and meet this person and that, and then walk home, and you kind of just had a day. And maybe it didn't make a lot of sense, maybe it doesn't, you know, have high drama, maybe it's not the greatest story ever fucking told, but it's life, you know. And I think this captures kind of a slice of life in a way that I see very few films do, and it's very tight in what it does through very simple means, like the whole Lenny finding him, like the idea of him getting the few plot points that are there very smartly placed within it, which I think is also shows how smart these filmmakers were. There's 3 films that Morris Engel and Ruth Orkin made, Lovers and Lollipops and Weddings and Babies. I would actually like to see them and review them at some point, because I love this movie so much. This is a great film in general, this is a great film to watch. It's on YouTube presently, that's how I saw it. I know it's on Canopy if you have that. It's on various services, but it's a nice, lovely little film. And I think it represents so much to what would happen with New York cinema, with indie cinema, with the French New Wave, because it showed what was really possible at the time technologically, which now doesn't really make as much sense. But I think the story of it works because it shows you that part of life, and that part of life, I think, of childhood, of just like having a wonderful day or having a day of discovery, that I don't really see going away despite us having iPhones or whatever. That never really changes, and I think that's one of the beautiful things about this film. And you know, if you know Coney Island, I think there's a little bit more there for you. There's certainly something there for me. I've seen it screened a lot in New York because I think New Yorkers really like this movie. But I still think it's a really great movie, whether you like New York or not. It's a wonderful little film. There's not a lot of kids' films that have kind of indie, smaller sheen and also have that joy and wonderfulness of childhood and aren't, you know, creepy and weird or something. And this film isn't. It's very pure in its intentions, and also one of the most indie films ever made. You know, one of the most interesting, you know, did this on no budget, but look what we made kind of films of all time. It might be the best one. It just has that energy in it. It's within the edits, it's within the cinematography, it's within these kids. You know, I'm not sure if these kids are acting or just being fun kids. You kind of aren't even really thinking about it because you're so there with them. You're thinking about like, oh yeah, a kid would look under there, a kid would, you know, be obsessed with horse rides. You know, that's all he really cares about. A kid would fall for this sort of thing. And you know, you hear stories of the 50s and how kids weren't being looked after maybe as much, and you're always like, how did these kids survive? But it's nice to be in the kind of daydream of what this film is. And And I love that this is really what influenced so many things, because it's so kind of sweet in its beginnings and really just trying to capture kind of the moment of a day. And in some ways it works kind of like a good short film, but it doesn't lose its steam or momentum. It is plotless, but in a really wonderful way. It got my 4-year-old to watch. She paid attention throughout the entire movie and got into it, which I think says a lot, that like this film that was meant so much to Francois Truffaut can matter to a little kid in the 2020s is pretty remarkable. I think that's actually really cool. That shows you kind of the power of cinema, and I think this is probably one of those films that says it better than anything. So if you've never seen The Little Fugitive, I highly recommend it. It's a wonderful movie. There's almost like not a ton to talk about, but I feel like the spirit of it and the wonderfulness of this little film, just anytime I hear about Coney Island, I think of this movie. And in some ways it's maybe too obscure. It should be mentioned, but it's a great kind of a family film. Other than his brother tricking him to believing he killed him and stuff, there's nothing really that objectionable in my mind. And it's an important part of film history, and it's a great way to get kids into something that's older, a different aesthetic, and open them up to the possibilities of movie making and independent film in general in a real wonderful kind of children's story type of way. So if you have seen Little Fugitive and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.